Hey y'all, my name is Brittany. The book that I read was A Year in the South, Four Lives in 1865 by Stephen V. Ash. I did purchase it on my Kindle app, so I did read it digitally on my phone. I did read this entire book. I read it cover to cover, every word on every page. Just a quick summary of this book. It follows the lives of four different people in the year 1865. All four of these people come from different backgrounds. We meet a man who was born into a slave family, like that's what he knew his entire life. We have another man who was a minister in a slave family. And then we have a man who was a Confederate soldier. And then we have a woman who was a widow, single mother to 7 children. This book was a little bit of a tough read for me, just because it's typically not the genre that I go for when I read books, so it was a little hard to get into. But once I did get into it, it was pretty interesting. One thing that I really did like that the author did, he set the book up, instead of doing chapters, he set it up by season of the year 1865, so you followed along through spring, summer, fall, and winter. So that was pretty cool. Another thing that I really liked that he did, he used like excerpts from diaries, journals. He used stuff from the books that these people may have written and things like that, so it really makes it a little bit more personable to be able to connect with each character or each person. Another thing I like that he did, he added like pictures and things like that, maybe from their younger years. Like the woman, she was privileged. Her dad was a doctor, so there were pictures of her when she was a child, of course. The man who was born into a slave family, of course, didn't have photos of him as a child. But it was really cool to be able to see these people, and it was really cool to be able to understand that these were real people, these are real things that they were going through. And it was you got a feeling of connection with these people. Overall, I do think that I would recommend this book. I wouldn't recommend it to my best friend who reads sci-fi books, but I would recommend this to somebody who likes to read about stuff from this time period. I really do think that I would recommend it to educators, specifically ones that teach history. I also think that I would recommend it to possibly a high school educator, a history teacher, because I do think that this book, it is easy to read, so I think that it would be easy for high school students to follow along and read about it, do a book report on it like we're doing. It talks about emotions and struggles that these people face, so it's really important that we learn, like when slavery was abolished, it wasn't just rainbows and butterflies. People face these struggles, with their faith, with their humanity, with their lives, with work. So it's really important that we understand that people were going through a tough time. It wasn't just immediate happiness. I based a lesson plan off of this book. I thought it was a really neat idea to learn about these people, and how they felt and how they struggled and how they became stronger as people. They became stronger as a society. I really liked that and what I got from this book. So my lesson plan was essentially the same idea. Of course, it was for a 4th grade class, so we're not going to read this book and do a book report on it. So what I did was my lesson involved, reading short stories or diary excerpts like you would with like Anne Frank or something like that during the Holocaust. I remember learning about that in elementary school. Just reading short little things like that and just hearing what people had to say and reading what people had to go through, and looking at pictures. One of the standards for the state of Alabama is to be able to describe and know what was going on in Alabama after the Civil War and during Reconstruction. So looking at pictures of like working railroads versus destroyed railroads after the Civil War was over. And then the main activity was to go in your history journal and write a diary or a journal entry, and you're going to tell it from the first person point of view. And you are going to pretty much talk about how you would feel. For example, like, Dear Diary, I feel sad, I feel stressed, just things like that. And just really get the students to be able to connect to these stories, and to be able to understand that, again, like I stated before, it's really important that we know that once slavery was ended, it wasn't just happiness and rainbows and butterflies. It was real, and it was raw, and it was a tough time for a lot of people. They were trying to navigate through this new life, and they were trying to figure out what to do. We hear about people who, when slavery was ended, they didn't leave the plantations and things that they were on, because that's the only life they knew, and they were scared. They were too scared to leave. But the people that did leave, they had to navigate through this life, and they had to figure out what they were going to do to live and meet their means and do all those things. So I kind of built a lesson plan based off of that. I thought it was a really neat idea, again, just to be able to connect with these stories and really understand, and hearing it from actual people, and learning about their experiences. So I thought it was very neat. 3 of the strategies that I used. The first one that I used in my lesson plan was the 3-2-1 strategy. Of course, we all know this one. It's just 3 things that you learned, 2 questions that you have, and 1 thing that you enjoyed from the lesson. The second strategy I used was the wraparound strategy. This one, the students are given just a quick question or a quick prompt, and then you go around and ask each student individually to answer what you have asked them or told them. For example, I would be like, how do you think people felt? How do you think that these prior people who were in slavery felt when the war was over and when slavery was abolished? And you could just say, give me a 1-word answer, like an emotion, and you could go around and they could say sad or happy or stressed or nervous, things like that. I really liked that strategy. I think it's also a really good assessment tool to make sure that they're keeping up and that they understand with what's going on. And finally, the third strategy I used is a super simple one. It was using a word wall or a word bank. And because in my lesson plan we're writing a diary entry or a journal entry, I thought it was really important that the kids should have like a word bank, or even on a word wall at the front of the class, just like our vocabulary words, the tier 1 through tier 3 vocabulary words. And one of the criteria that I had in my lesson plan was that the students had to use at least 5 of those in their journal entry. Tier 1 would just be those basic everyday words that they know, like happy, sad, nervous, anxious, just different little things like that. And then going all the way up to tier 3 being like Civil War, Reconstruction, abolished, things like that. So I thought it was really important not only that they have that as a tool to use for this assignment, but they're able to utilize that and see them every day.